today we're going to be taking a look at a couple of things, and I want to establish one of the great dilemmas that I think we face here, and establish what that dilemma is. The dilemma is quoting secondhand and even sometimes firsthand sources. First and secondhand sources, and we may say, well, a firsthand source is somebody that actually deals with an individual. He was there, he heard that person say it. And a secondhand source is that person who was there and heard it told someone else, and then that person repeated it. Much of the confusion about the Book of Mormon, and certainly about the early teachings of many of the brethren, are due to these secondhand sources. But just think of your own life for a moment and how often you've talked to somebody and they walked away with a different understanding than what, I mean, even though you're a first person. So what I'd like to do is try to establish what I call supreme source. And there are two supreme sources for the geography of the Book of Mormon. So as we take a look at that over here, you'll see it on the screen. The Book of Mormon itself is one supreme source. And the other supreme source are the actual and verifiable words of the prophet Joseph Smith that were subject to his review and correction during his lifetime. All right? So that's a pretty high standard, but it's going to be a very important standard as we kind of pursue some of these that I'm going to be talking about here in a couple of minutes. So let's take a look at that first one, which is going to be the Book of Mormon. Now, I'm going to just highlight this for a moment because that's not where I want to spend the majority of my time. I just want to just kind of point out, if we're going to have a theory about the geography of the Book of Mormon, then it needs to be consistent with the internal evidence found within the Book of Mormon. If it's not consistent with the evidence within the Book of Mormon, we got to throw that theory away. Now, that's one of the challenges that I have for the Great Lakes advocates, those that want the Zarahemla to be someplace other than where the prophet Joseph Smith said it was. And so it's an issue of, does your theory, does it match? And let me give you a prime example of what I'm talking about. And this is something we've talked about before, but I just want to highlight it for a moment. If you're going to find, I'll go over here this side, there we go, bingo. If you're going to find the lands of the Book of Mormon, one of the things you have to find is gold, silver, and copper in 4 separate areas. The land of Lehi's first inheritance, the land of Nephi, the land of Zarahemla, and the land of desolation. And the references are there. I'll let you look at them and you can check them out there. But these are the kind of phrases that are there. Great abundance, most plentifully, all manner. I mean, it's the gold, silver, and copper. Well, where do you find even one of these east of the Rocky Mountains in the areas claimed by the Great Lakes advocates? The answer is you don't find any, especially the lacking is silver. You can find certain areas where you might have gold in Georgia and South Carolina, maybe up into Maryland. You can have some placer gold washing down out of the Rockies and out of Canada. But in terms of gold in abundance, you don't have it. You really don't. Not east of the Rockies, you don't. And also, you don't have silver. That's one of those things that's just lacking in that area. But in order to qualify for the lands of the Book of Mormon, now I'm talking to a Great Lakes advocate. This person said, well, maybe they picked it all up. But I'm going, oh, okay. They picked up all the gold, all the silver, all the copper. Then tell me where the rock formations from which they came. Where are the rock formations? Because they don't appear out of a nothingness. Talk to a geologist. I have a geologist's son. Talk to a geologist. Ask him, where are the rock formations here? You're not going to find it. And so that's an example, just one example, is that if you don't match your map of the lands of the Book of Mormon with the internal evidence, then it can't be that. There are at least 26 locations where you're going to have gold, silver, and copper down in the Mesoamerican area. For example, at Tegucigalpan, you'll find it in 1575 when the Spaniards set their capital up there. They set it up over a Mayan mine, and from that same exact mine, both gold and silver came out of the same mine. All right, that's just at Tegucigalpan. And it's all over that whole area, of course, the Sierra de las Minas, and we could go through all of that. I'm not going to do that. I want to, by the way, but I'm holding back, all right? So let's go. We're going to continue on here and just go to the next thing here. Again, this is another example of something that is kind of exciting, that you have to have a land of volcanoes. Now, let me just introduce you Dr. Jeffery Wynn. Now, his name is Jeffery Curren Wynn. He's currently a head up there in Vancouver, Washington, over 72 different. I've got some other credentials here about him. He's amazing. He's the past president of all the organizations. They've got asteroids named after him, okay? And so I'm telling you, his credentials are impeccable. But Dr. Jeffery Wynn, and let me just see here for a second. I've got a whole, by the way, addendum on him and what he had to say. He took 3 Nephi 8 and broke it down verse by verse. And he makes a pretty profound statement about that, which you can kind of read there. But Dr. Jeffery Wynn, let's see, what was it? Oh, yeah, let's see. Oh, yeah, he wrote 260 articles, books, and maps, 260. He's was ahead of the USGS program, has currently the 72 scientists under him. And he makes this statement that we're going to read right now together here. He says, the account given in 3 Nephi 8 in the Book of Mormon is a scientific report. All 72 volcanologists at the USGS Volcano Observatory would agree. The sequence of events are extremely accurate. Much of the information recorded was unknown to scientists in 1830. To believe that the account given in 3 Nephi occurred anyplace else, and his reference was the Pacific Rim, and you know the Ring of Fire around, they call it sometimes as well. There are 33 volcanoes in Guatemala, as an example, by the way, and he said that it could occur anywhere else, and I found that interesting, is ridiculous. No volcano eruptions of any significance east of the Rocky Mountains has occurred in the last 10,000 years. It's not about just earthquakes. They just had a little quake there, I think, back east. It's not that, it's about volcanoes. And if you're going to find the lands of the Book of Mormon, you need to find a land of volcanoes. His verse-by-verse commentary, I'd love to spend the whole time and talk about that. In fact, I think we ought to invite him to one of these and have him give a presentation. I think that'd be very exciting, have him do that. Let me give you kind of a sample. He says, all volcanoes begin with molten lava, which rushes to the Earth's surface and creates a shaking of the surrounding territory. Once the magma blows through the vent and into the air, it creates a great storm, tempest, earthquakes, powerful winds traveling hundreds of miles an hour ensue. The concussion blast can be heard as far away as 5,000 miles. Lightning resulting from escaping gases will flash through the air. Now, he goes through and he goes verse by verse, starts at 3 Nephi 8. He says about the great storm, and he gives an explanation on each one of those. Let me jump down. Thunder from the ground. These are called Raleigh waves, which are concussion blasts, which are caused by the volcano. And then he talks about lightning. He says, and there's a unique kind of a lightning. He says, it was not discovered until 1979 in the Iceland quake that lightning was associated with earthquakes and volcanoes because, and what's interesting in the Book of Mormon, it says that they experienced lightning such as never had been known in all the land. So now I was just down, I was down there 2 weeks ago, and it was lightning. So they're used to that kind of lightning. Well, then what kind of lightning would they not be used to? The lightning that comes from a volcano. And it's the gases and the combination of things. And he said it wasn't until 1979. Anyway, Jeffery, Dr. Curren goes through, Curren Wynn, W-Y-N-N, goes through it. He talks about cities sinking, the burning with fire. By the way, he said it doesn't even have to come close because that magma and some of the pyroclastic heat that comes out of that is 600 degrees. I said, you don't even have to get close to a city to set it on fire. And he said, but the blast itself going by would just set things on fire, like Zarahemla that would be burned at that time. Anyway, the question is, where are the volcanoes? If we're going to find the lands of the Book of Mormon, we need to find the land of volcanoes. And as 3 Nephi 8, it then becomes evidence of that. Well, let's take a look at something else here. You can see we could spend time in each one of these, be great. Can I do that right? There we go. Now, I have the Dresden Codex here, and there's another copy of it over there I see, and they have the Nuttall Codex as well. And so these codices are interesting because they fold up in an accordion fashion. I'm always reminded of Alma chapter 12, verse 1 and 2 there, where it says, and we did unfold the scriptures unto them. And literally, you have to fold these like an accordion. So if their scriptures were written on these, they would have to unfold them. All right, in order to read them. That's what they just have to deal that way. But on the Dresden Codex, it has a fascinating history. I'd love to spend the time talking about that history too. But the Dresden Codex is the one that when the Russians came in after World War II, and they took that back with them, and that's the one that the Russian used to, he was the one that should get more credit for breaking the Mayan code, which eventually Linda Sheely and some others helped finish off in that. But he's the one that suggested that the Maya was also phonetic. But the point being that they brought that back to Dresden, and that's where it is now. But they named each of these major ones, like there's a Paris and a Madrid and the different codices, after the cities in which they reside, obviously. But they finished the translation that this man spent, his name is right there, Joaquin Ritzig, spent about 40 years working on the translation. and finished on the 11th of March of last year, 2011. He said the last part of this is a treasure map and actually says that there are 2,156 gold tablets. And he says they are reported on here in the Dresden Codex. And that they are to be located in what we now would call Lake Isabel, which I think was Isha Balaam, the female goddess Ishel, and then Balaam is the spirit world there, the jaguar. But the point being here that he feels like that's in a sunken city that is there, and it's a pre-Christian city that's sunk. Anyway, he talks about that, and he's down there now. I was just there 2 weeks ago, and I can tell you that they're trying to negotiate with the Guatemalan government. Whether they find the plates or not, as far as I'm concerned, is not really as relevant as the fact that it reported it on the Dresden Codex that there were these gold plates with hieroglyphic writing on them. So if we're going to find the lands of the Book of Mormon, those kinds of evidences are wonderful. Not a few cave scratchings, but actual evidences of a high civilization that we could find. So that's the Dresden Codex. I wanted to mention that. So now we're going to move on because I just wanted to introduce that as if you're going to find the lands of the Book of Mormon, the geography of it, the supreme source, number one, is going to be the Book of Mormon itself. And whatever theory you have has to be consistent with that internal message in the Book of Mormon. Secondly, the Joseph Smith's actual and verifiable words. Let's talk about why Joseph Smith's actual and verifiable words are so important. So here we go. Why are Joseph Smith's words and opinions about the geography of the Book of Mormon more important than the opinions of others? Well, the answer to that has to do with vision, so let's take a look at that one as well. Here we go. Boom. It'll come. I know it will if I just, there we go. Why are Joseph Smith's words about the geography of the Book of Mormon more important? Okay, one more time. Joseph says, I was informed, I was shown. Now, he makes that statement also in the Wentworth letter there, in that March 1st, 1842, Times and Seasons as well, by the way. But he makes that comment, visions, and more visions of the geography of the Book of Mormon. Truman Matson is the one that said Joseph had 23 separate visions that he was shown before he translates one word in the Book of Mormon. And I think that's kind of fascinating, but think of it this way. Consider Joseph Smith watching the History Channel while the angel Moroni is going to be narrating it. Now, so that's what you're supposed to see there. See, there's Joseph watching the TV, and that's the angel Moroni. And Joseph is watching the History Channel, and literally, I want you to get that vision in your mind that that's how clear it was. Now, Joseph's not the only one that has that kind of experience. But let's see if we can go on with that. Okay. This is, while he was conversing with me, the vision was open to my mind. At the period of time that he was the editor of the Times and Seasons. So let's just take a look at that. In terms of a historical document. A lot of people are very, I think they are skeptical for whatever reasons, but Joseph Smith was very much a responsible individual when it came to that, and he felt that it was a matter of revelation that the Lord had told him to take care to make sure that his history was accurate. So Joseph was very much concerned about the accuracy of all this, and the Times and Seasons was not just another paper. Let me just give you a little more background on that. Here we go. Times and Seasons, what are we talking about? Well, it was an early church newspaper published in Knoxville, Illinois between November 1839 and February 1846. Now, Joseph Smith is going to serve as the editor, technically from February, but he doesn't take responsibility till March 1st, where he says, we're going to get that in just a second, but anyway, Joseph, so sometimes people say, well, is it February or March? Well, it depends if you take Joseph literally. There's a word that starts in March, but there's a signature here on the February one. Yes, it does, but that, we'll get into that in just a second. So here, that's a little about that, and there we go. There were 3 specific editorials which identified Sarah Hemla being in Guatemala. And you notice it says the Guatemala of 1842, because the Guatemala today and the Guatemala of 1842 don't look alike. The Guatemala of 1842 went all the way up to the Isthmus of Tehuantepec, all right, and the northern part of that. Where Palenque is today was a part of Guatemala, and all of Chiapas was a part of Guatemala at that time. So he identifies the Zarahemla, actually the city of Zarahemla being there, and also the Guatemala of 1842, and the narrow neck or small neck of land being in Central America. And those were all stated under Joseph's editorship. Now, we'll go on here, the two editorials in the September 15th. Now, the front page editorial, this is really a critical point. And I went back, Hull University has done quite a bit of study of early newspapers, 1830s, 1840s, and they report that the primary stewardship of any editor then and now is the front page. The headlines and the front page. So the reason I say that is, can you imagine that Joseph Smith, as editor, would not be aware of the front page of a newspaper which carries his signature at the end, and also for which he's responsible. We're going to see how that works here in just a minute. But anyway, these are editorials. They were challenged by the Great Lakes advocates because they don't want Sarah to be where Joseph Smith said it was, and they also don't want to find themselves in opposition. So anyway, let's go ahead here. There's 8 Times and Seasons articles. They challenged 3 of them. It makes me believe they haven't read all the Times and Seasons, because there are a total of 8 articles that are part of the series to establish the divine authenticity of the Book of Mormon. And so these articles are very consistent, all their details. Now, I'd like you to turn to page 16, okay? So turn to page 16 in your handout. There should be enough for everybody there. And if you go to page 16, look at it, says Editorial 8. Editorial 8.
Since our extract, and this is an extract from Stevens and Catherwood, and I'm going to be talking about them in just a moment. But since our extract was published from Mr. Stevens' Incidents of Travel, we have found another important fact relating to the truth of the Book of Mormon. Central America, or Guatemala, is situated north of the Isthmus of Darien. Darien is Panama, and once embraced several hundred miles of territory from north to south. The city of Zarahemla, burnt at the crucifixion of the Savior and rebuilt afterwards, stood upon this land, as will be seen from the following words in the book of Alma. Now, I want you to I've highlighted and put in bold several things. Notice that the we, you're going to see how we are, either are is underlined or in bold, we are, etc., etc. And then, in particular, I want you to notice the word agoin. Do you see the word agoin there? All right, in the middle. All right. That's going to be one of those 13 words that were unique to the prophet Joseph that weren't found in the writings of Wilford Woodruff, who lived more than 40 years after, 50 years actually, after the prophet Joseph dies, and John Taylor, who lives more than 40 years after the prophet dies. In all of their lifetime writings, these men never used the word agoin, and it's found frequently in Joseph's writings. It's found also in the writings of others that were born in Vermont and raised in western New York. It's kind of a colloquialism. I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. And you find, for example, that the letter from Liberty Jail that Joseph dictates, that in that letter he says, "O Father," this would be section 122, "O Father, what are these men going to do with you?" That's the way it reads in the original letter. And the way we've cleaned up the English a little bit, so we say, "O Father, what are these men going to do with you?" Which is more correct English. But my point being there, this is one of the 13 words, couplets, and phrases unique to the prophet Joseph that wasn't found, and I'm going to get into more of the details of that as we kind of roll along. But I wanted you to understand also why do we have "we" bolded there? And you're going to see that in the other articles as well. Because it was the key to editorship. And and this will make more sense as we kind of move through here, okay? Let's go ahead. There were 3 men who worked in the Times and Seasons newspaper office between March and October of 1842. They were Joseph Smith, John Taylor, and Wilford Woodruff. Those are the 3 candidate authors that we're going to be talking about primarily for who could potentially have written this. So just give you an idea. All right. Great Lakes advocates and a few others have challenged the authorship of these Times and Seasons presumptive editorials. Presumptive, remember when Romney was the presumptive candidate?
Well, you assume it gets to a point where you say, well, he's the presumptive candidate because he's won, but he hasn't yet been just crowned, so to speak. And so there's that element where you're presumed, where you're there. Well, Joseph is the presumed author of these articles because he was the editor that signed at the end of the paper. But anyway, the comments, and without any evidence, the Great Lakes advocates are saying that John Taylor or maybe Wilford Woodruff went ahead and wrote those articles, and Joseph was just unaware of them, of course. Now, because of that, I determined to do a comprehensive author identification study. My own doctoral dissertation, by the way, happened to be on identifying speech patterns. And so I was and I thought, I'll never use that again in my life. I can't imagine ever going out and analyzing speech patterns ever again. It was called the Flanders System of Interaction Analysis. That was the technical name for it at the time, and it was quite interesting. But lo and behold, I found that I would be using that again. So I decided and determined to do a very comprehensive study of author identification, and the results were absolutely conclusive. I used a total of 11 different author identifiers. Now, if you get into the field, you'll know what that means. Most people will use one or two. So why would I be obsessive? Because I am obsessive, that's why. And I went ahead and did 11 author identifiers. 9 of them are bean counting, meaning they're very objective. And 2 of them are what you would call subjective, because different people can interpret that information. I'll get to that here in just a minute. We'll talk more about it. But let's go ahead and kind of move on here. These are some of the doctrines that come out of the Times and Seasons. If you want to go back to your earlier part of the handout, you can kind of see that now. We'll talk about that. What were the doctrines? We'll take a look at that. The Wentworth letter, as I mentioned, the Articles of Faith. Are Articles of Faith? Yep, Articles of Faith come out of the Times and Seasons. What about the Book of Abraham? Yeah, March 1st, March 15th, May 16th. That is the Book of Abraham. For example, I brought the Times and Seasons with me. All of Joseph's 8 months were all contained within the volume 3 of the Times and Seasons. I'll give you an example. That look familiar to anybody? Okay, that's the round hypocephalus, the round disc that you find in the Pearl of Great Price there. Well, that's in the Times and Seasons. That's where that was published. So the Times and Seasons is an incredibly valuable historical document, and it's even more important because it was subject to Joseph's review and correction. All right? And Joseph was not afraid of correcting people. And if something came out, in fact, there was even a marriage announcement that came out that Joseph was very upset about and went back and made a correction on. He had no problem. There was a special area called errata, and you'd make your changes there. Joseph had no problem making corrections. So that's why if these front page editorials were incorrect, why would Joseph not go back and correct them? For example, if John Taylor or somebody else wrote them, but we're going to find out he didn't. The history of Joseph Smith, actually from 1820 up to 1834, and Joseph and Emma, we find in their diaries that they'll say, today we went over my history for the publication in the Times and Seasons. And the histories that were published in the Times and Seasons up to 1834, okay, we have in the Times and Seasons. And that's really, really another valuable resource in the life of the prophet Joseph. The First Vision, Ladies Relief Society, Joseph's views on government. And this is interesting on Joseph's views on government. I just want to kind of point something out to you here in this outstanding new book written by me, okay? Some of the Great Lakes advocates are saying things like that the United States of America is the promised land. And I love America. I believe it is a promised land, but it's part of the promised land. And again, Joseph Smith would talk about, as the angel Moroni would say to him, this continent. He said, it's the story of the inhabitants of this continent. Well, this continent was a lot larger. And of course, I mentioned earlier, in Joseph Smith's day, the word continent included both North and South America. It wasn't until 1904 that our dictionaries and things changed, because America was one continent with 2 parts, a northern and a southern. And you'll find it in the 1828 dictionary, Noah Webster. You'll also find it in the 1832 and 1833 dictionaries. But the point being here that it's the continent, and the Great Lakes advocates are assuming that the promised land is only maybe the United States of America. I have no problem. It's a whole totally different area to talk about the fact that the United States is a wonderful land. Zion's going to be, the center stake of Zion's going to be there. The center place of Zion's going to be there. But I wanted to point out something that Joseph said in the views. Now, the views were actually, this is a great example of where Joseph gives instructions to W.W. Phelps, and W.W. Phelps writes this. Then Joseph prints up 1,500 copies of it and signs his name to it. That was not a problem because he took basically, but W.W. Phelps, we know, is the one that wrote it, but Joseph accepted responsibility for it after he read it and approved it and put his name on it. He also did that with the letter to the Green Mountain Boys. But the point is, Joseph reviewing it, correcting it, putting his name on it, adding things to it, etc., making it his own. He's the author of it. So here's what we have. This is a quote now from the views of policies and politics that came out in 1844. And when a neighboring realm petitions to join the union of Liberty's sons, my voice would be, come, yea, come, Texas. Texas in 1844, of course, Texas doesn't come until 1845. So Texas is not a part of the union at that time. Come, Texas, come, Mexico, come, Canada, and join the Sons of Liberty and let the union spread. Joseph's concept and invitation was for Mexico and Canada to become a part of the United States. So what do you think the concept of a promised land had to do with? It had to do with certainly the northern part and the southern part as well, and the Isles of the Sea associated with them. But isn't that an interesting invitation that Joseph would extend to those people at that time? Now, just to underscore the importance of the times and seasons, look what the Lord says. Now this is the Lord, and this is a thus verily. Verily thus saith the Lord unto you, my servant Joseph, go and say unto the 12, that it is my will to have them take in hand the editorial department of the times and seasons, according to the manifestation which shall be given them by the power of the Holy Spirit in the midst of their council, saith the Lord, Amen. That was January 28, 1842. And you'll also find that's the way they designate now that new Joseph Smith papers. The volumes 1 and 2 are out on the journals of the prophet Joseph. And this is so Joseph Smith papers, JSP papers, journals 2, and on page 38, you find this quote, meaning that it wasn't something that B.H. Roberts invented or added or anything else. It was the actual thing. So that's how important that the times and season was that the Lord would say that. Well, they chose John Taylor to be in charge of the editorial department. They chose his assistant to be Wilford Woodruff, that is the 12, and they choose Joseph Smith to be the editor-in-chief. We don't have the notes of the meeting, but we do have this statement from Joseph Smith. This paper commences my editorial career. I alone stand responsible for it and shall do for all papers, that's editions of the paper, all papers having my signature henceforward. That means the signature block at the end of that particular edition. Now, I wish you were all close enough so I could just show this to you here, but I did blow it up so you'll be able to see it. And that is the signature block of Joseph at the end of each edition. This is the signature block right here. And not only is it there, it's right there. That is exactly what this is right here. No less, no more. That's the signature block. Now that is critical for identifying who is legally accountable and for the paper. We have evidences in the 1830s and 40s of liable. And if you printed something that was liable and you were sued, you'd say, even if you didn't sign an article, and if you wrote it, for example, in the we format, whoever signed at the end was held legally accountable and responsible. So that signature at the end, the signature block, is incredibly important. And of course, as it says there, that's Joseph Smith who takes that upon himself. Now, we have another statement from the church, which I think is very interesting. It's very carefully worded, and let me read that to you here. For ladies in the church, the priesthood manual that we've been using for the last since 2007 are called Teachings of the Presidents of the Church, and currently we're on George Albert Smith. But it started with Joseph Smith, and this is the one, the first Teachings of the Presidents of the Church, Joseph Smith. and on page 559. In dealing with the period of time that Joseph served as editor of the Times and Seasons between March of, and I put March because that's when he took responsibility, March of October 1842, a carefully worded statement explained that several editorials were published in the Times and Seasons of 1842. This is the quote now from the Priesthood Manual. During an 8-month period of that year, from February to October, Joseph Smith served as editor of this periodical and frequently published editorials signed Ed. Though others helped to write many of these articles, the prophet Joseph approved them and published them in his name. Now, I won't call that an official declaration by the church. We'll call it at least a semi-official declaration, and certainly approbation for the very things that I've been talking to you about now, that this was a very important paper, the Times and the Seasons, and that the things that were said in that paper then become critically important. Well, let's take a look here as we're moving right along. Joseph receives an important book, and that important book is going to happen in 1841. Dr. Bernheisel, John Bernheisel, is in New York on a mission, and a man that's there with him is named Wilford Woodruff. And Wilford Woodruff meets with Dr. Bernheisel, and this is when that book, The Incidents of Travel in Central America, and I've got a kind of a photographic reprint. Ted Burton has the original. He has got originals of these, all 4 of the originals. This came out in 2 volumes, by the way, and in 1841, and became one of the best sellers of all time for that, certainly that publishing company. In fact, it outsold everything except the Bible until about 1865. So from 1841 to 1865, that's a long time to stay on the bestsellers list. And Brigham Young's going to write one of his sons and say, get rid of your Dickens, Charles Dickens, and buy Stevens and Catherwood's book. That was Brigham Young. Get rid of your other and buy this, because he wanted them to know it. So it was widely accepted, Stevens and Catherwood. But imagine, there had been no physical evidence for the prophet Joseph for all these years, from 1830 and now 1841. Well, he was very much appreciative of receiving those books, and we know that he had all 4 of them. What I didn't tell you is that Stevens and Catherwood were so successful, they went back and they wrote another 2-volume series. It was called Incidents of Travel in the Yucatan. But this is called Incidents of Travel in Central America, Chiapas, and the Yucatan. Well, this is the personal writings of the prophet Joseph Smith by Dean Jesse. And it's interesting because we have a letter here that Joseph is going to write on the 16th of November in 1841. And he's thanking, in this letter, he says, this is to Dr. Bernheisel, thanking him for the 2 books, the 2 volumes of this book. I received your kind present by the hand of Elder Woodruff and feel myself under many obligations for this mark of your esteem and, now talking about the book, and friendship, which to me is the more interesting as it unfolds and develops many things that are of great importance to this generation and corresponds with and supports the testimony of the Book of Mormon. I have read the volumes with the greatest of interest and pleasure, and must say that of all the histories that have been written pertaining to the antiquities of this country, it is the most luminous, the most correct, luminous, and comprehensive. How would Joseph know that it was the most correct? How would he know it was the most luminous? Go back to the History Channel. Joseph Smith, the angel Moroni, he sees these things. He sees them in vision. He's going to open up those books, and there's a, I don't expect you to be able to see these. This is all of Catherwood's paintings. That's the artist that went, now I'll just explain to you what this is. The book, when they went down, they go down to Belize to start with, and then they start their journeys, and they go to Copan. And Catherwood was not only an artist from England, graduated from the Royal Academy, but he was also an architect. And so when he draws some of these buildings and these pictures, they're phenomenal. I mean, he does a great job. That's one of them right there, for example, out of Copan. Well, Joseph's going to open up, he's going to see that, and guess what he's going to see? He's going to see the same things that the angel Moroni showed him. That's what he's going to see, boom. And then let's go on and see. And remember, Joseph doesn't, look how exact and precise some of these drawings are. Now, they would have been in black and white in the book. But he later went up and he had an exhibit hall like this in New York City. People had to pay like a quarter to go into the hall, and they had artifacts like from here, from Central America, because the people in America at that time had been told that there was no high civilization in the Americas. That this is, if you went to Harvard, you went to Dartmouth, you went to any of those schools, you would have read a book called History of America, okay? And in that, by William Robertson, and published in 1824. And when you read that book, it would say there was no high civilization in the Americas. They were nomads, kind of like the Bedouins, and without any civilization whatsoever. And so nobody believed that there was any high civilization. So when Catherwood draws these paintings of a highly sophisticated culture, and Stevens, who, by the way, Stevens was a great writer, and I still enjoy reading him today, but he was supported and was told that he was one of the great writers by two contemporaries, Edgar Allan Poe and Nathaniel Hawthorne, said that he was one of the, in fact, they said he was the greatest writer, especially in the area of travels. All right, so kind of interesting how really significant he was in his time frame, which we've lost that contact with him and the significance of it. But he draws all of these paintings, and so people would come in and they were just dumbstruck. Now, remember when we had the moon rocks came, and people would line up for blocks to see the moon rocks, or when the King Tut exhibit came, and people would line up for blocks again, and they'd come in and look at that King Tut exhibit. All of those things. Well, that's exactly what happened with Catherwood and Stevens. They would give these lectures, and people would just come by the thousands to hear these things, because it was like a new revelation that there was a high civilization. So do you think the prophet Joseph and the times and seasons aren't going to make hay out of that? That they're not going to say, guess what? We've been telling you this the whole time. We were telling you that back there in 1830 when the Book of Mormon came out. We were telling you there was a high civilization in America. One of the reasons it was mocked and scorned was because people were doubting that there was evidence of a high civilization in the Americas. Okay, I've got to keep moving along here. Let's take a look at another thing. All right. Here's another article. Let me just quote from this other article. I recommend you read the whole article, but I'm just going to excerpt. Stevens and Catherwood's researches in Central America abundantly testify of this thing. This particular one, by the way, wasn't challenged by the Great Lakes Advocates, but it should have been. If they're going to be consistent, they might as well challenge this one as well, even though it's also signed Ed, by the way, which means that the editor, and whose name was at the end of that edition? Joseph Smith, as editor. Stevens and Catherwood's researches in Central America abundantly testify of this thing: the stupendous ruins, the elegant sculpture, and the magnificence of the ruins of Guatemala and other cities collaborate this statement. Their ruins speak of their greatness. The Book of Mormon unfolds their history. I don't know if you remember me reading to you the word unfolds. Joseph used that word a lot. Unfolds, unfolds, unfolds. We're going to find that, and I'll talk to you about it here in just a minute too. Okay? All right. I mentioned attribution is how you identify. It means who's the author. When we talk about attribution, that's what we're talking about. Identifying authorship. There are three ways to identify authorship. I'm really now reporting from Hull University on that. The editor, that is, the editorial will sign at the end of the individual article itself as Ed. That's one way to identify it. Or if it was a person that was invited to write that editorial, their name would appear, their actual name would appear at the end of that front page editorial, for example. That was another one. Or sometimes they use pseudonyms. Joseph sometimes would use Alpha, and Hiram would use the word Omega. And the people knew who that was. That they were the co-presidents of the church, etc. The editorial article was written in the editorial we format. Now that is significant, folks. So when you find an article written in the editorial we, that is the signature of the editor, and he doesn't need to sign. He doesn't need to sign the article. He's done it by using the editorial we. This meant that the article could be signed or unsigned at the end of the individual article, but because it was written in the editorial we, using words like we, us, and our, it was attributed to the person who signed as editor at the end of the paper in the signature block. The most important attribution was the signature block on the last page of the edition of the newspaper. And that went for all the early church newspapers, whether you're talking about the Evening and the Morning Star with W.W. Phelps at that time, or you're talking about, pick a church newspaper, turn to the last page, and all papers at that time, turn to the last page, you'll find the signature block of the editor. Okay, well, keep on going here. I hope we're keeping on going, all right. I want to talk to you about this comprehensive author identification study of these. I took those 3 editorials because those are the ones challenged by the Great Lakes Advocates. So I took those 3 in particular. And the process, let me just move right along here, because the process, the ones they challenged, involved comparing the editorial words in the editorials in question. That is, so I went back to the editorials, now some of those editorials were 3,000 words long, but their editorial comment wasn't 3,000 words long. And I want to explain one other little thing to you here. Sometimes you say, well, why didn't that person sign as editor? Well, if he took somebody else's work, he couldn't sign the entire article as the editor. So what he would do is he would put their article in, and then in the midst of it, make an editorial comment. So he wouldn't sign as ed at the end of the article because the article was actually somebody else's, but his editorial comments are easily identified by saying, we would like to make the following observation about the above article, that kind of a thing. And so it became very obvious that that was an editorial comment. So I didn't count the non-editorial comment words. I just took the 906 editorial words that were a part of those that were very definitely belong to that. Now, I used for a resource a wonderful thing that came out in 2005, and it's the LDS Collectors Library 2005 edition from LDS Media and Deseret Book, and it contains a comprehensive collection of lifetime writings of key LDS persons, okay? And it's really quite comprehensive. Millions of words. All right? Couldn't do this without the computer. Wouldn't be able to be done at all. Now, I'm going to go to this next one, but I'm going to kind of go through it very quickly because I want to you have a copy of it. Those are the 11 areas that I looked at. In other words, author identifiers. They're sometimes referred to them as discriminators. We're going to discriminate. We're going to use this. And number 1 up there is words unique. That's words, couplets, phrases that are unique to one author that aren't found in the writings of any other author. They're found in the articles. See, let's get the Unabomber's letter. So we read the Unabomber's letter. We say, all right, now we're going to get some other letters and see if we can find anything unique in the writings of this man that aren't found in the general writings, but can be found over here in the writings of the Unabomber. And that's part of what they did, by the way. And using that very thing, they were able to identify. Is that a sign for me? It's not, is it? I'm good. All right. Okay. That means there's a fire. We better get out of here. Yeah. All right. I'm not leaving. All right. So I'm going to go through them now slide by slide here and just kind of give you an example of each one. You have them down there, and so we're going to go over it here. There's the 13 words. You have a copy of them. Those words were unique to Joseph Smith and not found in any of the writings, not any of them, of John Taylor or Wilford Woodruff. That's their entire lifetime writings. Then discourses that were all published. I'm talking about everything in the Journal of Discourses. Somebody said, well, yeah, but you had a scribe write that down. Are you sure that they wrote it accurately? We also had scribes write down all of it, and the assumption that is made there is that the scribes are going to be fair in making their mistakes to everybody. You see what I'm saying? There'll be kind of a uniform, so it kind of eliminates itself as a primary concern. But anyway, take a look at that for a moment. There's 13 statements that are found unique, and the very bottom one that's in red there is a goin'. And that's the nail in the coffin. That is absolutely the nail in the coffin. But these others are unique. They're not found in the writings of John Taylor or Wilford Woodruff. And I actually looked at even more than those ones. But let's take a look at discriminator number 2. And I'm going to just explain this to you here. And I'm going to do this rather rapidly. My wife says this will bore you and you'll all be asleep before I get done with it. So I'm going to tell you, discriminator number 2 is called a probable first and only time use. See, it's possible that an author might use a word. Let's say I'm talking about an MRI, the magnetic resonating thing, and I'm giving a talk about that. Well, there may be words that I would use in talking about that I wouldn't use in any other context. So it's possible to have words, and I may never use them again, I may never use them before, but it's possible then that John Taylor or Wilford Woodruff could have used those words for the first time in that article. But each time you have a first and only diminishes the probability of authorship. Do you follow me on that? All right, I hope so. Now here's how to understand that. Imagine that you're going to write a 906-word editorial wherein for the first time ever in your life you used a word that you had never used before and you would never use again in all of your writings and discourses for the rest of your life. When you deal with what I affectionately call statistics, you have you always have these margins of error. You have to include them, and generally we're looking at it, and you're going to find today it's kind of magically about the number 4. If you have a margin of error of 4, you say, okay, that's reasonable. Joseph has 2, by the way, here. 1 out of every 450 some odd words in Joseph's here is going to be a new probable first. But look at John Taylor. Imagine you're going to write something, and every 70th word you're going to introduce a new word you've never used before and you'll never use again, and you're going to use that for 906 words. Every 70 words, you're going to introduce a new one. This eliminates John Taylor as a potential author. I don't even need to go on with the study. I could have ended it there, but I'm obsessive and I didn't, all right? Number 3, Wilford Woodruff, 1 new word every 26 words. Do you know how insane that would be? If you're doing, when you talk about standard deviation, you have a mean, that is the average, and then you have a kind of how far away do you get from the first standard deviation, the first standard, second, third. We would be out by the 9th standard deviation. There's no such thing. That's so far out there, it'd be like saying, well, on this DNA thing, you're 1 out of a billion chances. It's so removed, it's so remote. This eliminated John Taylor and Wilford Woodruff, but we're going to go on anyway and take a look at another one. And that is vocabulary size. What was the vocabulary size? Now, how do you do that? You eliminate all the duplicate words. So out of every 906 words, and we're going to take numerous samples, and we're going to say, what's the average vocabulary size that these men used to write a 906 words? So extracting from the many, many writings of John Taylor, Wilford Woodruff, and Joseph Smith, also W.W. Phelps, by the way, and some others, but they were eliminated. So we're down to the 3 that worked in the office at that time. And the bottom line there is that both John Taylor and Wilford Woodruff had about a 23 to 25% larger vocabulary than Joseph Smith did. And yet, whoever wrote those articles on the Times and Seasons had a 300-word vocabulary. All right? Joseph is the only one in the margin of error. He's the only one. By the way, you never expect a perfect match. You just don't. But look at the difference there. 297, that's Joseph's average. That's based on 3 separate 35,000-word samples. 35,000-word samples. Okay? 105,000 together. That is so far beyond what's necessary to establish a good baseline that that's why I double-dog dare and challenge the Great Lakes advocates to replicate this study. And I did it 2 ways. One is what I call sophisticated bean counting. They can do it. The 9 objective, let them do it. You will not come to a different conclusion than that Joseph Smith authored these articles. You will not. I'm so confident I'd bet my wife's life on it. That's how confident I am. That's confidence, right? No, she's precious, wouldn't want to do that. But, okay, let's go on to the next one here. Discriminator, the most likely to use. Now, this is interesting because the most likely to use, I want to explain that to you. So you take the key words, there are 90, after you take out all the duplicates and everything, there's about 95 key words and phrases that you would say those are significant. And one of them is the word surely. Now, you find that a couple of times in the articles. It's in that October 1st article, by the way. So the word surely. So now we're going to go and we're going to count all the lifetime uses. Every time that John Taylor or Wilford Woodruff or Joseph Smith used the word surely in their entire lifetime. And you find that Wilford Woodruff used it 12 times. You're going to find that John Taylor used it 12 times. And Joseph used it 376 times. Who would you think is most likely to use the word surely? Well, let me think about it. Let's take all 95 words. All 95 words. Joseph used the same words over and over again. He had a smaller vocabulary. But the point being here is that Joseph was most likely nearly 80% of all 95 words. Joseph was the most likely to use them out of the 3 candidate authors. All right? Those are some of the things you look at when you're trying to use author discrimination. Number 5, this is the average sentence length. Now, this is also based on 3 35,000-word samples. So I get 3 35,000-word samples from these authors and then say, well, did they each come out exactly? No, there was about a plus or minus 4 there. So that means they're going to vary from plus or minus 4 if you take another 35,000-word sample. Well, what did it turn out? It turns out that John Taylor's average sentence length here is 25 words. Did I have that up there? Yeah, okay. Is 25 words. Wilford Woodruff, he was Wilford Woodruff was a powerful speaker. I've read his work. I love Wilford Woodruff. He was a powerful speaker, but he used very short sentences. It's very interesting, but his average sentence length was 22 words. Joseph rambled. Okay, he used a lot of conjunctions, but and ands. Joseph's average sentence length was 40 words. That's based on 105,000 words, one sample. Okay, 35,000 but totaled up there. Now imagine that for a moment, and then say, who wrote the articles in the Times and Seasons? Whoever wrote those articles had a 36-word average sentence length. Who's the one that only, now remember, plus or minus 4, who's the one that even comes close? Wilford Woodruff and John Taylor, they are so far away from 40-word sentences, it's insane. It's just insane. Turn to the next one. Let's go to the next one here. It's that way through all of them, by the way, so I can save you time, just tell you that, right? Discriminating at a closest match to the frequency. This is, now, I use this because this is commonly used. It's what was used to determine who were the authors of the Federalist Papers, who authored the, let's see, that's not, yeah, the lectures on faith. Who authored the lectures on faith? They use stylometrics. Stylometrics means using non-contextual words. Now this is where, don't worry, that's easy to understand. If I talk about MRIs, that's the context. But if I use the words of, the, a, and, those are non-contextual words because you can use them in any context. It doesn't matter. So those are the words, and generally what they measure is and, of, and the, and it creates a fingerprint by an author. So we can take the fingerprint from the Times and Seasons articles, and it'll have a pattern of the use. For every 100 words, they may use this many ofs and this many thes and this many a's, and you get a line out there, and you say, wow, that's pretty distinct. Well, if you're doing an actual fingerprint, they look to see how many dots that match on the curves on your finger as you check that out. Well, that's what we're talking about here with stylometrics, and you're going to notice there with that I used all of the words. There were 13 of non-contextual words that we're looking at here, and they included the a, all, are, and, are, as, be, book, in, is, it, of, to, the, 13 words. Now, if there was a match, if two authors they used the same frequency, then they both got credit for that. But of those 13 words, the closest match there on stylometrics was 3 for John Taylor, 4 for Wilford Woodruff, and 11 of the 13 for Joseph Smith. You need 7. 7 would convict him and send him to prison forever, okay? I hope you're kind of getting a feeling for this. Okay, now we're going on to discriminator. These are real easy ones here. These are super bean counters. Discriminator number 7, sentences less than 10 words. So as you analyze the how many sentences did they use that were less than 10 words? And it comes out pretty easy. Look at that. Do I have that up there? Yeah, 10. Okay, the Times and Seasons articles were 8. Joseph's were 10, John Taylor's were 26. See, again, John Taylor, raised in England, English and American English are different. Fair? When he came here at 24 years of age, he moved to, first of all, Albany, New York, and then later he moved on up to Toronto. But when he spoke and things, the way he spoke in conference was considerably different, and it's quite fascinating, as a matter of fact, his character. Did you know he often would sing in conference? John Taylor, and you can find it in journal discourse in other areas, but he would break into song in the middle. John Taylor would go along and he'd just start singing a hymn. And it's a very distinct style. That comes under style and syntax, but less than 10 sentences. And you can see here that he had the 26% of John Taylor's sentences were less than 10 words. Let's go to 100 words, and I want to move through this part because I want to get to something else here that significant. So we're looking at discriminator number 8. Times and Seasons had 4% of the sentences that were plus 100 words. Joseph Smith had 6%. Now that's based on 105,000, okay, of Joseph's sentences and things and words here we're talking about. And John Taylor's was 1% of his sentences were greater than 100 words. And Wilford Woodruff, and this is really important, that's not 3%, that's 0.3 of 1%. So who again, is the closest match there. Who would fall into that category of saying, if we had a whole, if I, for example, I got to tell you that I did go back and take some of the other articles that were written under Joseph editorship, and the more articles I took, the closer they came to Joseph matching Joseph. If you take 906 words, I took 2,100 and some odd words, and every one of them just kind of kept closing in on Joseph, even like that more. So that part's it. But I'm only reporting on the ones that the Great Lakes advocates have challenged, and you're seeing the results here of that. So let's move on to the next two discriminators, which are, this is rhetorical questions, but it's really interesting under rhetorical questions. Look at that. Look at John Taylor. 15%. Do you really mean that? That's a rhetorical question. Are you kidding me? That's a rhetorical question. So John Taylor and the English style of speaking was to use a lot of rhetorical questions. But look at Joseph Smith. And this one, Wilford Woodruff, he was close, by the way. They were close enough that I said it was an equal match. So this is the one match that you do have, but he was eliminated in discriminator number 2. So we're just putting it up there so you can see that going through all of these. This is a comprehensive. That's why I called it a comprehensive author identification study, to kind of see who really was the author of those articles. So let's go to the next ones here. I want to go to these two here. Style. When you talk about style, you're talking about the manner in which a person writes, dictates, or speaks. That's referred to as their style. And the next discriminator, number 11, is the syntax. That is how they interrelate words. Joseph used a lot of Bible phrases because he learned to read on the Bible. So we find in all of Joseph's writings a lot of Bible phrases. One of the phrases unique to Joseph that wasn't found in the writings of John Taylor or Wilford Woodruff was "none can hinder." See, that comes out of Job. Job says, "Who can hinder the Lord?" And the response, of course, which is rhetorical, is "none can hinder." So Joseph uses "none can hinder" in a number of his different writings, but John Taylor never uses that, and Wilford Woodruff never uses that. But that's one of those other 13 words unique to the prophet Joseph that wasn't found in the writings, but is found in the articles in the Times and Seasons that the Great Lakes advocates have challenged and said, Joseph Smith didn't write that. He was out of town. I'm just going to tell you right now that I looked at all 260 days of where Joseph Smith was during the time of his editorship, and you can actually go to a website, just drlund.com, and look under I have the research there on that shows Joseph's whereabouts for the 260 days that he was there. I was going to put it all in the book, but it would have made the book like this, all the research in it. So I put them on what I call web addendums, and then you can go to the web and find the research there on the web, and I'll give that to you again here in just a minute. But I'm going to give you an example of style, and then I want to move on. Here's Wilford Woodruff. Here's what he says. If God were to choose the most unworthy man on earth to be a prophet of God, he would choose Wilford Woodruff. That's a Wilford Woodruff statement that he makes. Let's contrast that in style to Joseph Smith. I know more than all the world. At least the Holy Ghost does, and he's with me. Would you say there's a difference in style in there just a little bit? You see the bravado? So even though it's subjective, and there are phrases, a parenthetical sarcasm means that I'm going along, and then I'm going to insert parentheses around this. I'm going to insert a comment. And I want you to go to page 16. Go back to page 16 for a moment, if you would, in this here. And let's go down to the very middle where it says, it is certainly a good thing for the excellency and veracity of the divine authenticity of the Book of Mormon that the ruins of Zarahemla have been found where the Nephites left them. All right? And that a large stone with engravings upon it, as Mosiah said, a large round stone with sides sculpted in hieroglyphics, as Mr. Stevens has published. Now, he published that, and I can tell you it's on page 104 here of his book, but he says, who are these people? We've been told that they were savages, but savages never carved these stones. Savages never built these buildings. I mean, that's on page 104. But he says that, and so Joseph is making a comment now on Stevens. So let's go through. As Mr. Stevens has published, is also among the left remembrances of the to him lost and unknown. That's a parenthetical sarcastic statement. And Joseph will use that also when he talks about Alexander Campbell in the Evening and Morning Star. He'll say, well, it may be far above Mr. Campbell to acknowledge someone as lowly as I am. I mean, There's some sarcasm in that, but Joseph wasn't above or below or whatever you want to talk about using that. But that's an example of a parenthetical statement that's thrown into the middle. Joseph used that a lot, much more than, well, in fact, exceedingly more than either of the other potential candidate authors. So that's where that comes to. Okay, well, let's go back. There's a lot to read there. That's why I'm just going to leave that with you as kind of information. And let's go back now and just tell you. See if we get to her. Am I there? All right. I'm just going to tell you that without question or hesitation, really, I don't know of a more thorough study that I've ever done in my life, because I wanted to nail it down. And if I would go where the truth led me, and if the truth said that there were three options. The results of this study could have been Joseph was the author, Joseph wasn't the author, or it was inconclusive. It was conclusive. You saw it is conclusive. I don't think a reasonable person could look at that if they were truly objective and say, my goodness. That's why I challenge them to replicate this study. I hope they do. I challenge anybody else to replicate the study. And they don't have to use my data and my information, but I will give it to them if they want. And they can look at it and examine it, and they will find, using two methods, statistics. Well, that's one way. Let's just go with the bean counting. They will find, using either method, that Joseph Smith authored those articles claiming that the city of Zarahemla was located in the Guatemala of 1842, and that the narrow neck of land was the Isthmus of Tehuantepec. And let's get to that right now. So here you have the great misreading. Now, I want to acknowledge that I appreciate what was done here. And Ted, are you here somewhere? Ted Stoddard, where are you? Ted, raise your hand if you're here. He's not here, okay. Well, in 2009, Ted Stoddard published an article, and you can get this article out of the Book of Mormon Archaeological Forum, bmaf.org, and it's called From East to the West Sea. I wholeheartedly concur with that. 2 weeks ago, I made a specific point, flying over the Isthmus of Tehuantepec in the rainy season. And I want to go back to a flood that occurred in 2007. That flood flooded 80% of the state of Tabasco. And I want to just going to show you something of what that looks like, because the statement here, the misreading that most people have of that is they insert in their mind the word East Sea. And the word East Sea is not there, and it's not there twice, which says to me, yeah, that's really it. And I remember that Dan Ludlow also believed that and taught that, and I was a student of Dan Ludlow's in 1959 at BYU. Can you believe that? That's amazing. All right, but I just got to tell you that. So the east, it doesn't say East Sea there. So it means some point east. So when we talk, some people thought, well, they have to cross the isthmus, but it's 120 miles across. Could you cross that in a day or a day and a half? Go 120 miles? That's a misreading. You're not getting it. The true interpretation of that, as just take it for what it says. It says from some point. It says from the West Sea to the east. Not East Sea. And then it says again in Helaman, from the east to the West Sea, but some point east, vice versa on that. But it says it twice, very clearly. Now, what does that mean? Well, let's take a look at a little bit of a map here. As I flew over that area during the wet season here just 2 weeks ago, and was able to look out of the plane and look down, when you get to that area, do you see where that blue is there, that blue dot? That blue dot covers the area of the flood that happened in 2007. The reason that it is not like that today, like the Okefenokee swamps or like the Florida Everglades, but Stevens and Catherwood in his book here has a map of the 1839, how it looked at that point in time, and I find that kind of fascinating. You're not going to be able to see it, but I can just show you that it is right here to here, across here, and this entire area is a wetland. It's a coastal plain, and it's a wetland, and they have dikes and things there now, and that's why, much like Nauvoo, Commerce, Illinois, we're going to drain all this wetlands area. So they've drained that and recaptured most of it, but when the floods came in at that time, it flooded 80% of the state of Tabasco, and it would have looked much more like that right there during the time of the Book of Mormon. So you didn't have to defend the entire peninsula or the entire isthmus. You didn't have to do that. Now, why do I say the Isthmus of Tehuantepec? Because there are only three isthmi that we talk about. The first isthmus is down at the very bottom down there, and that's the Isthmus of Darien or Panama. Then you come up to Nicaragua, and that's where you have the Isthmus of Rivas. That was going to be, by the way, the Panama Canal, but they feared that there'd be too many volcanoes, active volcanoes, so they were fearful of putting it there. And then up at the Isthmus of Tehuantepec was also another candidate for the Panama Canal. But now, Joseph Smith identifies Zarahemla as being then in Guatemala. Well, also then we know the land of desolation is north, and you have to go, as Ether and others talk about, you have to go south from the land of desolation to get to the land of Zarahemla. Well, what isthmus is north of Zarahemla? There's only one isthmus north of Zarahemla. It's the Isthmus of Tehuantepec. So, and some people think, well, that's, if you look at it, it's more north than south. But what it says there, that's what, look at that red arrow. I don't know if you can see the red arrow on either side here. Maybe with my magic pointer I can hit it, right, kind of in there. From the West Sea to some point east. Now, there, if we had if you could see the terrain that would be through there, you would see that swampy kind of a water, you wouldn't have to defend that whole area. You could put your army, and this is a personal opinion now, but my personal opinion is that the day and a half's journey was probably a different point east than the day's journey. The one in Helaman would be different than the one. It wasn't like it's the same exact one. It could have been on a line, but they only had to defend from a certain point, and it might be the time of year they had to defend it. Because it was certainly the wet season, you're going to get a lot more of the waters flooding, and there's all kinds of mangroves through there. I don't think people appreciate how really wet that would have been at that time. But I'm not suggesting that they had to cross the whole point either. I'm just saying that in order for an army to defend that, and you know, Joseph Allen talks about El Perdón, the Great Wall. It comes down through, it's right in that same area. We tried to put it close to where the arrow was. I don't know if that's even shining on the wall. Yeah, okay. I can't quite see where that is. But right in that area is a wall that extends out into the sea, and I think that's to keep an invading army from coming up on the shores and getting around on the other side. But it was called the Great Wall, El Paredón, and so that would be, that's certainly a possibility. But, and I want to go down and see if I can just find that myself, and just, not that I don't believe Joe, it's just I want to see it myself. But anyway, looking at that, that's why I say that the Isthmus of Tehuantepec is the only real candidate for, if you have Zarahemla identified by Joseph as being in Guatemala, north of Guatemala, where the land of desolation would be, there's only one isthmus up there. And that isthmus is the Isthmus of Tehuantepec. So anyway, there's that thought. Now let's go on. How am I doing time-wise? I got it. Okay. He's got a sign here that tells me what I've got. Okay. We're doing good. We are doing good, if I can get this to work again. Oh, that's the wrong one. You know, that's kind of good. Nice, sophisticated. By the way, I think the Lord gave us grandchildren to help us with our computers. I have no question about that. I've got all these grandkids, and I just go, help, and they come in, and they hover over the thing and chant a few times, and it works. And I don't even go there. What I wanted to kind of, I'm not going to go into all of the challenges with the Great Lakes Advocates. I'm going to leave that for you. I cover that. If you're interested in that book, it's in the book. I want you to know I cover the challenges made by the Great Lakes Advocates, and I answer every one of their questions about Zelf, about the Oliver Cowdery Cave experience, about Joseph Smith's whereabouts. All of those are to get into that. And then I ask them questions that they have not answered one of. Not one. And so they can have all the theories they want, but until they become serious. Now, after, you know, when you make a presentation like this or any kind of presentation, you've got to have a pretty thick skin if you're going to be an academic. Because people are going to come out and are going to skin you alive, and you've got to expect that. And so I hope that they're able to see that I have no personal animosity toward any Great Lakes advocate. They have their opinion, the Lord and I have ours. Well, maybe that's a little narrow. I should probably be a little more open to that. But let's take a look at the Law of Moses. This is significant. This is highly significant because the Book of Mormon is from the time of 600 BC until 3 Nephi 15. It is a Law of Moses book, and if I do nothing else, I hope to impress upon you that thought, because when you think about the Law of Moses. In fact, let's turn to, part of the page 107, 108, 109 of my book are in here, by the way. Let's go to page It's the last 3 pages. So let's turn to page 18. Turn to page 18. I'm just going to highlight this because if you read just these 3 pages alone, you will become convinced that the Book of Mormon was that the keepers, and here's what Neil Maxwell said, the Book of Mormon peoples, though Christians, were tied much more strictly to the pre-exilic law of Moses. See, Lehi leaves Jerusalem before the Babylonian captivity, that's pre-exilic law of Moses until Jesus came, than we in the church have fully appreciated. Elder Jeffery R. Holland insisted that it is important to understand that for 600 years the descendants of Lehi observed the law of Moses, and scholars of the Book of Mormon like Hugh Nibley and John Welsh and Gary Gillum and Don Norton and others have all supported the concept that the prophet historians of the Book of Mormon were keepers of the law of Moses. And anyway, there's a lot of that. And if you read, and I've got all the references here, so I want you to look at those, but you start out with Father Lehi offering up a thank offering a couple of times there when they get the plates, when the boys come back, all of that. And then later you're going to get all the way through the Book of Mormon, but I'm going to jump ahead here to the very last quote on page 18. 200 years after Lehi left Jerusalem in 400 BC, the prophet Jerem declared in solemn terms, and now, behold, 200 years had passed away, and the people of Nephi had waxed strong in the land. They observed to keep the law of Moses, and the Sabbath day holy unto the Lord, and they profaned not, neither did they blaspheme, exhorting with all long-suffering the people to diligence, teaching the law of Moses. And it's going to go all the way through, and it says they did keep in all things the law of Moses all the way through. Do you think that means the Passover? Well, let's take a look at some of the implications of this, and you'll see that I've identified one of them up here. One of the implications of keeping the law of Moses is that understanding that Nephi was justified in killing Laban. There's 5 reasons under the law of Moses why Nephi was justified in killing Laban. All right? And I'm going to tell you that I just put out one of them here, and that is a thief who is in possession of your stolen goods. If his life is taken, that's called justifiable homicide. I wish the King James translators had translated the 10 Commandments correctly, because they would say not that thou shalt not kill, it should say thou shalt not murder. Murder is the unlawful taking of human life, and justifiable homicide, of course, is the lawful taking of human life. And in war and in other cases you have that. So moving right along, that's kind of fascinating. Quickly here, Sherem, he accused Jacob of blasphemy. Well, in Leviticus 24:16, the penalty for blasphemy is death. But if you're a false witness, in Deuteronomy 19:19, if you're a false witness, you're to suffer the death or the penalty that you accuse the other person of falsely. So that's why Sherem dies. All right? Doesn't have to be stoned here. He's going to die because he accused falsely Jacob of being a blasphemy. And just very interesting. And you notice earlier the statement made by Jeremy, we do not blaspheme, we do not do this, do not do that. Anyway, I'm going to let you read all of that on your own. If we do this here, and let's get to this one, and then I'll kind of conclude on that thought. If you're going to keep the law of Moses, and these people did keep the law of Moses until Jesus came and said, the law is fulfilled in me. And if you're going to keep the law of Moses, folks, one of the things you're going to keep there is you're going to keep the, I'm back to this particular one, you're going to keep the calendar. This is Exodus 12:2. This Passover month, the word Passover is inserted because that's the context. This month shall be unto you the beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year to you. So when you read in the Book of Mormon, the first, it says this, and it was in the first month, and it mentions the first month. And ironically, of course, in the Book of Mormon, it means the months first, second, third, fourth. That's the way it was done during the pre-exilic time, before the Babylonian captivity. Once in the Babylonian captivity, it was then they named them. They took the names of the Babylonian calendars, they adapted them to their own names, and for 2,450 years or so, we've used the Babylonian names for the Jewish calendar. Why didn't Joe Smith use those Babylonian? He took a Hebrew class. He should have known that. He would have known that. But why did he call, in translating the Book of Mormon, first month, second month, third month? And the answer is because that was translated document, and that's the way it was referred to, because Lehi left Jerusalem before the Babylonian captivity, and that's the only way they referred to the months, was not by the Babylonian names, but by first month, second month, third month. Anyway, something Joseph would have known, would not have known maybe at that time. But the thing is that they certainly would have followed that. Now, what does that mean? It means this, that we can read the Book of Mormon, you know when the first month is. The first month is always, take it to the bank, always going to be between March 21st and April 25th. March 1st, April 25th, always. Even today, you're going to find, because they use a lunar calendar that's adjusted by the solar equinox. And every year they adjust that. That's why our Easter and their Passover celebration is always either together or within 11 days of each other, and we have that. So when it says that Lamanites are going to come to battle in the 10th month, they're going to come in January and February. I want to ask my Great Lakes advocates this. Are you kidding? Buffalo, New York, Zarahemla, Iowa, in January and February, naked, their heads are shorn, and they're coming in loincloths. I would say one more time, save your arrows, Nephites. They're going to freeze to death because many are cold and a few are frozen. And but once you're able to identify the months there, that can kind of help you as you read the Book of Mormon. Well, I just would like to say it's been a great privilege and opportunity for me to be here with you. The other ones, you have copies of the other part of that, and you can look at these topics. And if you want to go to that www.drlynn.com, you can pick up some of the statistics. Now, my wife tells me that she gave those, has that done and sent them off yesterday, so they may not be on the website until sometime later this week. But thank you all very much.